Let's speak to the top promoter, Frank Warren. Frank, good morning.
Good morning, Gary.
What's your reaction to David Haye's win?
I'm delighted for him. I'm delighted that he won the fight, but it was pretty much an awful spectacle to watch. He only came alive in the last round, I think, when David Haye called him. But again, everybody gets carried away because the guy's is a giant of a man. Doesn't mean he was a good fighter. I mean, it was a pretty boring fight up until the last round. In fact, if it hadn't been for a British fighter involved, I think a lot of people, certainly I would have, turned it off. It wasn't not at all in any way a great fight to watch. It was just looking at this guy lumbering around the ring, and David backing off him and occasionally throwing a punch.
But it was one that had caught the public's imagination, wasn't it? Because of course the photographs looked absolutely fantastic. He's 7'2", sort of nearly a foot taller and 7 stone heavier. It did capture the public's imagination.
Without a doubt, of course it did, and that's why. The guy's name's David, and he's fighting a 7'2" giant. I mean, without a doubt, it did. But if you actually look at what the content was, it wasn't a fight. And and the thing is, with people are talking about talking about Valuev like he's something special. I mean, he's not ordinary. I mean, he's probably one of the poorest heavyweights you've ever seen. He's now fighting next time around. David's got a different type of fight. He's fighting John Ruiz. He's got to fight him. John Ruiz is a guy who actually was beaten by Roy Jones, who stepped up, in his time from middleweight. In fact, it wasn't Van Holyfield. Ollie who won was the last guy to do it. Roy Jones. Roy Jones has beaten Ruiz, so that's what he's got next. But when you start talking about the Klitschko's, and it is a poor heavyweight division, but when you start talking about the Klitschko's, I mean, they're totally different fights. They're guys who actually can box, can throw punches, and that's when you're going to see. Whether David Haye actually, can do it at that level. Beating Valuev a freak, is not the yardstick to measure him on.
Well, I was going to ask you, where would you put that in terms of great British boxing performances? But from what you said, it almost makes that question irrelevant.
Well, you watched the fight yourselves, and
yep.
if you look at, please, nobody can tell me that Valuev is a quality heavyweight. You can't even say he's an average heavyweight. I like to think I know a little bit about the game, and and I did in my column in the Sun. I thought Valuev would win the fight because I didn't think David Haye would get to him, and there was nothing in the scoring of it anyway. A lot of people had. I think most of the people on the Sky broadcast last night had Valuev winning. For what it was worth.
Our commentator Mike Costello got it spot on in terms of the cards on the radio. Listening to the 5 Live commentary, he was spot on when he scored it right at the end.
With what? With 2 of the judges?
Yeah, he was. Yeah.
Yeah, again, there was nothing. The fight was one of those fights you're watching it, and you're wondering who is scoring because there was such a lack of action in the first 10, 11 rounds. But you're talking now about. If you want to see the best of David Haye, the guys who are going to do that is one of the Klitschko brothers.
Okay, so when people get out the record books and they talk...
that question, answer that question.
Yeah.
Look, he won, he beat Valuev, but look at Valuev's record. Can you name a fighter on there other than, Shigaev is the Russian, who's not the greatest fighter in the world, is probably the only name on there. Of note, Evander Holyfield, when he fought him, was 46 years of age. He should have retired, and he won that fight. He didn't get the decision. He was 46, and Evander should have retired at least 6-7 years ago.
Yeah, so when people, as they will do in the newspapers this week and on the radio, say, let's put it in context of great British fights, I mean, I remember being ringside for McGuigan and Pedrosa, and that was a cracking fight. Also, Hunnigan against Dom Curry. You're not going to put that, you wouldn't put this in that class at all?
Well, I wouldn't even put it in the same breath, and I'm sure you wouldn't either, Gary.
No. I mean, just one final thought. You've spent your life in boxing, and as you've said, you do know a great deal about it. I guess some people would just listen, playing devil's advocate here, Frank. They'd say, oh, well, he's saying that because he didn't promote the fight last night. What would your response be to that?
They're entitled to their opinion, the same as I'm entitled to mine. But please, I mean, if you know anything about the game, please do not put Valuev in some context of being a great fighter, because he certainly isn't. He was a freak show, a lumbering giant, and how many punches were thrown in that fight?
Yeah. So if Haye came up against the Klitschko's at some point, he's not going to get a look in, you would think?
I would say get a look in. I mean, David Haye can punch, but you've got to see him in a fight where somebody's actually pressing him. I mean, he wasn't being pressed by him. He was just a guy sort of. He looked like looking at young Frankenstein, the dance scene for the first 11 rounds. But if you put somebody like a Klitschko in there who can actually fight, and they press David Haye, then we'll see it be a different type of fight, because these guys actually can put some shots together. They throw shots, they can move, they're big, they're strong. And I think it would be also a really, really good fight to watch.
Just as a final thought, how good a heavyweight can he actually become? And it does, regardless of what you've said, it does give British boxing a big lift to have the champion, doesn't it?
Without doubt, as I said to you before, at the very start, I'm really, really pleased that he's won it, and I'm pleased for British boxing that we've got someone there, because it brings interest to the sport. The newspapers are going to be full of it this week. I think for the wrong reasons, but it's great. It's great that he's done it, and we do need it. Let's hope, though, that he gets rid of John Ruiz, and then after that he does fight one of the Klitschko's.
He should get rid of Ruiz, because Ruiz has been around forever, hasn't he? And he's not that great.
Well, he's not that great, and as I said earlier on, he was beaten by Roy Jones.
Frank Warren, thank you.
Cheers.
What did you make of those comments?
Well, I agree with a lot of what Frank says about last night's fight. I mean, I think it was a spectacle, exactly as you said, because of the sort of size of Valuev, and because of the tagline of David and Goliath. So I agree with everything that Frank says about that. However, I do think that, as you alluded to there, David Haye is going to be very, very good for British boxing. I think he'll beat John Ruiz, and I think he's come along at just the right time for British boxing, because at a time when we've just lost Joe Calzaghe and effectively Ricky Hatton. I know Ricky Hatton hasn't actually retired yet, but effectively we've lost two of our biggest box office draws for a long time. David Haye is just what we need. We've got a heavyweight champion, and the guy has got some charisma, Gary. He's a good guy. He's a good talker. He's a good personality, and I think he's a good fighter. Last night may not have been a great fight, but I think there are big fights down the road for him, and I think he'll be a big personality in British boxing and in British sport.
This is